Helena had always prided herself on being vigilant about her neighborhood. She had lived in the same suburban community for over a decade, and she considered it her responsibility to keep an eye out for anything that seemed out of place. So, when she glanced out her window one afternoon and saw a man fiddling with a router and some cables outside the house next door, her instincts kicked in. She didn't recognize him, and in her mind, that was enough reason to be suspicious. She grabbed her phone and quickly dialed 911. "There's a man messing with the Wi-Fi equipment outside," she told the dispatcher. "He doesn't look like he belongs here. I think he's trying to tamper with something. He might be trying to hack into the network or steal information." The dispatcher asked her if the man appeared dangerous. Helena hesitated. "I don't know, but he's acting suspicious. Please send someone quickly." Meanwhile, the man in question, Marcus, was completely unaware of the assumptions being made about him. He had just moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks ago and was finally getting around to fixing his home internet connection. Frustrated with the spotty signal, he had stepped outside to inspect the wiring and ensure everything was properly set up. He had been an IT technician for years, so he was more than capable of handling the issue himself. As he worked, he noticed a few curtains shifting in nearby windows, but he brushed it off. He was used to the occasional curious neighbor, though he didn't realize that one of them had already made a call that would change the course of his afternoon. Minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up to the house, and officers stepped out cautiously. Helena watched from behind her curtains, feeling a sense of validation. She had done the right thing. She told herself it was better to be safe than sorry. Marcus looked up from his work, confused by the flashing red and blue lights. 2 officers approached him. "Sir, can you step away from the equipment and keep your hands visible?" one of them instructed firmly. Marcus raised his hands slightly, bewildered. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "We got a call about suspicious activity," the officer responded. "Can you tell us what you're doing here?" Marcus sighed, realizing what was happening. He had seen stories like this before, stories about people who looked like him being treated as threats for doing nothing wrong. He took a deep breath and kept his voice calm. "This is my house," he said. "I just moved in recently. I'm setting up my Wi-Fi." One of the officers exchanged a glance with his partner. "Do you have ID that proves you live here?" Marcus nodded and reached slowly into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. He handed over his driver's license, which had the address clearly printed on it. The officer checked it against the property records on his tablet. Sure enough, Marcus was the rightful owner of the home. Helena, still watching from her window, frowned as she saw the officers suddenly relax. One of them even offered Marcus a handshake. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear that whatever threat she thought existed had vanished. Then, to her horror, the officers turned and walked toward her house. A knock at the door made her heart pound. She hesitated before opening it to find 2 stern-looking policemen on her porch. "Ma'am, are you the one who called in the report?" one of them asked. Helena swallowed. "Yes, I was just trying to look out for the neighborhood." The officer's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, the man you reported is the homeowner. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Do you understand the implications of calling 911 on someone without cause?" Helena stammered. I was just being cautious." The officer shook his head. "Calls like this waste resources and put innocent people at risk. We're letting you off with a warning, but please think before you make another report like this." As they left, Helena felt a deep sense of shame settle over her. She had been so sure she was doing the right thing, but now she saw how wrong she had been. Meanwhile, Marcus went back to his work, shaking his head. He had hoped moving into this new neighborhood would be a fresh start, but now he wasn't so sure. He wondered how many more times he would have to prove that he belonged. As Marcus secured the last of the cables, he couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling lingering in his chest. This was supposed to be a new beginning, a fresh start in a peaceful neighborhood where he could finally put down roots. Instead, he had been treated like a trespasser in his own home. He exhaled slowly, trying to push the frustration away. He had dealt with situations like this before, but it never got easier. He knew that if he let it fester, it would eat away at him. Instead, he decided to focus on what mattered: settling in, meeting his real neighbors, the ones who wouldn't see him as a threat, and building the kind of life he had envisioned when he bought the house. Just as he was about to head inside, he noticed a woman hesitantly approaching his driveway. It was Helena. She walked slowly, wringing her hands together, her face tight with guilt. Marcus considered pretending not to see her, but he decided against it. Avoiding the issue wouldn't make it go away. "Hi," she said softly. Marcus nodded. "Hi." An awkward silence hung between them before Helena finally spoke again. I wanted to apologize." Marcus folded his arms. "For what exactly?" he asked, his tone neutral but firm. She shifted uncomfortably. "For calling the police on you." I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I didn't realize you lived here. I should have asked before assuming the worst." Marcus studied her for a moment, debating whether to accept her apology. On one hand, he appreciated that she had come forward, but on the other, he couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. "Do you do that often?" he asked. Helena blinked. "Do what?" "Call the police on people you don't recognize," Marcus clarified. "Or was it just because of me?" Her face turned red. "No, She hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe I was just being overly cautious." Marcus sighed. "Helena, do you know how dangerous that could have been for me? Calling the cops on someone like me, an innocent black man just trying to fix his Wi-Fi. Could have gone a lot differently, and I'm the one who would have paid the price." Helena's expression fell. She looked down, her guilt deepening. "I didn't think about it like that," she admitted. "That's the problem," Marcus said. "People like me don't get the benefit of the doubt. We don't get to be suspicious, without consequences. We have to prove we belong. Every single time." Helena swallowed hard. "I'm really sorry," she said again, her voice softer now. Marcus nodded, accepting her words but unsure if they were enough. "Just do better next time," he said. "Get to know your neighbors before you assume the worst." Helena nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." She turned to leave, but before she did, she paused. "I know I have a lot to learn," she said. "If there's ever a way I can make it up to you, let me know." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure if there was anything she could do to fix what had already happened. But at the very least, she had been confronted with a truth she couldn't ignore. Maybe that was a first step. As he watched her walk away, Marcus sighed and finally stepped inside his house. He locked the door behind him, hoping that next time, when he stepped outside, it would simply be as a neighbor, not a suspect. That evening, Marcus sat on his couch, the glow of his newly set-up Wi-Fi router blinking steadily in the corner. The day had drained him, but his mind was still restless. He kept replaying the moment the cops arrived, the way their hands hovered near their holsters, the way they had looked at him with suspicion before even asking a single question. No matter how much he tried to shake it off, the unease clung to him like a shadow. A notification buzzed on his phone. It was a message from his sister, Tasha. "Tasha, how's the new place? Settling in okay?" Marcus hesitated before replying. He could tell her the truth, but he didn't want to worry her. Tasha had always been protective of him, and if she knew what had happened, she would be furious. "Marcus, yeah, it's nice. Just getting things set up." He stared at the message for a moment before adding another. "Marcus, met a few neighbors today." It wasn't exactly a lie. The next morning, Marcus decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. He had no intention of letting one bad experience define his time here. If he was going to live in this community, he needed to meet people on his terms. As he walked past Helena's house, he noticed her standing on her porch, coffee mug in hand. Their eyes met for a brief second before she looked away, clearly still embarrassed. Marcus kept walking, not interested in revisiting the conversation from yesterday. Further down the block, he spotted a group of people gathered outside a house. There were folding chairs, a small table with coffee and snacks, and a relaxed hum of conversation. A middle-aged woman noticed him and waved. "Hey there, you must be the new guy," she said with a friendly smile. Marcus hesitated, then smiled back. "Yeah, that's me. Marcus. I'm Linda. We do these little morning gatherings every now and then. Helps keep the neighborhood connected." She gestured to an empty chair. Want to join us? Marcus considered it for a moment, then nodded. Sure, why not? As he sat down, others introduced themselves. There was Ron, a retired firefighter, Jasmine, a teacher, and Miguel, who owned a small bakery in town. The conversation was light. Neighbors talking about everything from the upcoming community yard sale to local restaurant recommendations. It was refreshing. No one questioned why he was there. No one looked at him like he didn't belong. So, Ron asked, "How's the new house treating you?" Marcus chuckled. "It's great, except for the fact that my Wi-Fi setup almost got me arrested." The group went silent for a moment. Then Miguel let out a low whistle. "Damn. Let me guess. Someone thought you were breaking in." Marcus nodded. Linda sighed. "I hate that this still happens. Do you know who called?" Marcus debated whether to say anything, but before he could answer, a voice spoke from behind him. "It was me." Everyone turned. Helena stood a few feet away, looking nervous but determined. "I was the one who called the cops on Marcus," she admitted. "And I was wrong." The air felt heavy for a moment. Marcus crossed his arms, waiting to see where she was going with this. Helena stepped closer. "I know I can't undo what happened," she said, "but I want to do better. I want to be a better neighbor. And I'd like to start now if you'll let me." The group exchanged glances. Miguel raised an eyebrow at Marcus, as if to say, "What do you think?" Marcus looked at Helena, studying her expression. He wasn't sure if she fully understood the weight of what she had done, but at least she was trying. That was more than most people did. He exhaled and finally said, "All right, Helena, let's start with this. Why don't you sit down and actually get to know me this time?" A slow smile of relief crossed her face. "I'd like that." As she pulled up a chair, the conversation resumed. It wasn't a perfect ending. Nothing could erase what had happened, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. As the morning sun climbed higher, the conversation around the small gathering shifted from Helena's admission to lighter topics. People shared stories about their worst moving experiences, debated the best pizza place in town, and laughed about the neighborhood's unofficial lost dog problem. Apparently, someone's golden retriever had a habit of escaping and making new friends on a weekly basis. Marcus found himself relaxing, letting go of the tension that had followed him since the previous day. It felt good to be part of something, to sit among neighbors who were genuinely interested in who he was rather than assuming the worst. Helena, for her part, mostly listened. She wasn't sure how much she should speak, still aware of the damage she had done. But as the conversation flowed, she found small moments to contribute. She told a funny story about her first week in the neighborhood, when she had mistaken a teenager delivering newspapers for a burglar and nearly called 911 then. 2. "That was probably my first warning sign that I needed to check my assumptions," she admitted sheepishly. Miguel smirked. "Yeah, maybe." Marcus glanced at her, debating whether to say what was on his mind. Eventually, he decided to go for it. "Helena, I appreciate you owning up to what happened, but I have to ask, what exactly made me look suspicious to you?" Helena's face reddened. "I don't know," she stammered. "I saw you outside messing with cables, and my brain just jumped to the worst conclusion. I didn't stop to think. I just reacted." Marcus nodded slowly. "And that's the problem. You didn't see a new neighbor fixing his Wi-Fi. You saw someone who didn't belong." Helena swallowed hard. "You're right. And I hate that. I hate that I did that to you." Jasmine, the teacher, leaned forward. "Acknowledging it is a step, Helena. But the real work is in unlearning those biases. The next time you see someone you don't recognize, instead of assuming the worst, ask yourself, would you feel the same way if they look different?" Helena nodded, absorbing the words. "I will. I mean it." Marcus watched her for a moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. He wasn't the type to hold grudges, but he also wasn't going to let her off the hook too easily. "All right," he finally said, "then let's start over." He extended his hand. "Hi, I'm Marcus. I just moved in." Helena's lips twitched into a nervous smile. She reached out and shook his hand. "Hi, Marcus. I'm Helena. Welcome to the neighborhood." The group clapped and cheered dramatically, breaking the tension with laughter. Even Helena chuckled, shaking her head at the moment. As the gathering started to break up, Miguel nudged Marcus. "Hey, if you ever want a good coffee, my bakery's 2 blocks over. First cup's on me." "I'll take you up on that," Marcus replied with a grin. Helena lingered a moment after the others had left. "Marcus, if you ever need anything, help with something, a cup of sugar, whatever, just knock." Marcus smirked. "I'll keep that in mind. But I think I'll stick to handling my own Wi-Fi." Helena laughed, nodding. "Fair enough." As she walked away, Marcus took a deep breath, looking around at the neighborhood that no longer felt quite so unfamiliar. It hadn't been the start he wanted, but maybe, just maybe, this place could still feel like home. Over the next few weeks, Marcus slowly settled into life in the neighborhood. He set up his home office, found a local gym, and even tried out Miguel's bakery, where the man kept his promise of free coffee, along with a slice of the best cinnamon bread Marcus had ever tasted. But despite the warm welcome from most of his neighbors, a lingering tension still existed between him and Helena. While their handshake at the morning gathering had been a step forward, Marcus could tell she was still struggling with her guilt. Whenever they crossed paths, whether he was watering his lawn or she was bringing in groceries, she always hesitated, as if unsure whether to stop and say something or keep her distance. One Saturday morning, Marcus was out front cleaning his car when he heard Helena's voice call out from her driveway. "Hey, Marcus." He turned to see her standing there, holding a toolbox in one hand and looking slightly nervous. I was about to put together a new shelf in my garage," she said, shifting her weight awkwardly. "But I realize I have no idea what I'm doing. Any chance you're good with power tools?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. He could tell she wasn't just asking for help. This was her way of trying to make things right, to create a bridge between them that wasn't built on past mistakes. He thought about brushing her off, telling her to figure out on her own, but instead he sighed, grabbed a rag to wipe his hands, and nodded. "Yeah, I can take a look." Helena's face lit up with relief. "Great. I promise I won't call the cops on you this time." Marcus gave her a deadpan look. "Not funny." Okay, bad joke," she admitted, wincing. "I'm still working on that do better thing." Shaking his head but suppressing a smirk, Marcus followed her into the garage. The shelf was still in its box, with pieces of wood and screws scattered across the floor. He crouched down, checking the instructions. "All right," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's build this thing." As they worked, Helena asked him about his job, his family, and his reasons for moving into the neighborhood. He told her about his career in IT, how his sister Tasha kept bugging him to visit more often, and how he had chosen this community because he wanted a quiet, safe place to call home. Helena listened intently, nodding along. "I get that," she said. "I moved here after my divorce. Needed a fresh start, a place where I didn't feel like I was constantly looking over my shoulder." Marcus glanced at her, surprised by the honesty. "Guess we both had our reasons." "Yeah," she said softly, "which is why I hate that I made you feel unwelcome." Marcus tightened a bolt, then exhaled. "Look, Helena, what happened that day? It sucked, but what matters to me now is what happens next." She nodded slowly. "I won't screw it up again." By the time they finished assembling the shelf, the tension between them had eased. Helena handed Marcus a cold bottle of water, and they stood there for a moment, watching the sunlight filter through garage windows. "Thanks for helping," she said sincerely. "No problem," Marcus replied. "Just don't tell Miguel I can build shelves, or he'll have me fixing things at his bakery." Helena laughed. "Your secret's safe with me." As Marcus walked back to his house, he realized something. He had come to this neighborhood expecting a fresh start, and while it hadn't gone the way he planned, maybe, just maybe, he had found exactly that. Not just a house. Not just a neighborhood. A few months passed, and Marcus found himself feeling more at home in the neighborhood. The awkwardness with Helena had faded into something that almost resembled friendship. She wasn't perfect. There were still moments where she overcompensated, trying too hard to prove she had changed. But Marcus appreciated the effort. It was more than most people would have done. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus was setting up his grill in the backyard when his phone buzzed. It was Miguel. "Miguel, Neighborhood barbecue. My place. Bring something good. Marcus chuckled and shook his head. Miguel never asked. He just told people what to do. But Marcus didn't mind. He had grown to enjoy these little get-togethers, a chance to unwind and actually feel like part of community. A few hours later, he arrived at Miguel's house with a tray of marinated chicken wings. The backyard was already packed with neighbors, laughter, and the smell of grilled food filling the air. Ah, look who finally showed up. Miguel called out, flipping a burger. You bring the good stuff? Marcus held up the tray. Of course. He made his way through the crowd, exchanging handshakes and quick conversations. Jasmine waved him over to where she was sitting with Linda and a few others, and he gladly joined them, taking a sip from a cold beer Miguel had handed him. As the sun started to set, Marcus noticed Helena sitting off to the side, alone with a drink in her hand. Normally, she was in the mix of conversations, but tonight she seemed distant. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and took the empty seat next to her. You look deep in thought, he said. Helena blinked, as if pulled out of her own head. She smiled slightly but didn't immediately respond. Marcus leaned back. All right, I'll guess. Either you're trying to figure out how to finally beat Miguel at cornhole, or something's actually bothering you. That got a small laugh out of her. It's nothing. Just thinking about how much has changed. Marcus nodded, watching the fire pit flicker in front of them. Change is a good thing. She exhaled. Yeah, but sometimes it's hard to let go of who you used to be. Marcus turned to look at her. You're not the same person who called the cops on me that day, Helena. She met his gaze, her expression a mix of guilt and gratitude. I hope not. You're not, he repeated. Trust me, I know. A comfortable silence settled between them before Helena chuckled and shook her head. You know, I actually signed up for an anti-bias training at work. Figure it was the least I could do. Marcus smirked. Look at you, doing the homework. Helena rolled her eyes but smiled. What can I say? I'm trying. Just then, Miguel's voice boomed across the yard. All right, who's ready for the rematch? Marcus, you and me, cornhole championship. Let's go. Marcus sighed dramatically. Man, I just got comfortable. No excuses. Miguel shot back. Helena nudged him. Go. Defend your title. Marcus grinned and stood up, stretching. Fine. But if I win, I'm making Miguel bake me a whole loaf of that cinnamon bread. Laughter rippled to the crowd as people gathered to watch the game. As Marcus stepped up to take his shot, he realized something. This neighborhood had once felt like a place he had to prove himself in. A place where he wasn't sure he would ever truly belong. But now it just felt like home. The cornhole game was intense. Marcus and Miguel had a friendly rivalry that was always fun, even if it meant they would trash-talk each other relentlessly. As Marcus tossed a beanbag, he couldn't help but laugh at the fact that something as simple as a neighborhood barbecue could make him feel so at ease. The game went back and forth, with both of them landing shots and missing others, as the crowd cheered them on. Linda, Jasmine, and Ron made playful bets on who would win. Come on, Marcus. You got this. Linda shouted as he lined up for another toss. Miguel shot her a challenging grin. Don't jinx it. Marcus winked at her and then launched the next bag, landing it perfectly in the hole. That's how it's done, he called, striking a dramatic pose. Miguel muttered under his breath, then nailed a shot of his own. Don't celebrate too soon. The crowd was in stitches, enjoying the show, and Marcus felt that familiar warmth of belonging, the kind of camaraderie that only comes when you've truly become part of a community. This was more than just a game. It was a feeling of having a group of people around who saw you, not for your skin color or where you came from, but for who you were and what you brought to the table. Eventually, after much bantering and a lot of missed shots, Marcus claimed victory. I knew I had it in me, he declared, raising his hands in mock triumph. Miguel clapped him on the back, a grin on his face. You got lucky. You'll have to prove it next time. As the evening wore on, people moved toward the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories under the stars. Marcus found himself in the middle of a group, sharing a laugh with Ron and Miguel about some of the ridiculous things they had done as kids. Helena joined them shortly after, with a smile that seemed more genuine than it had in a while. She had a drink in hand and took a seat beside Marcus. "All right," she said with a grin. "Next time, I want it on the Cornhole Championship." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it's on. You'd better start practicing." Helena laughed, shaking her head. "We'll see. But seriously, Marcus, I'm glad you're here." He looked over at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. He had been so focused on his own experiences that he hadn't stopped to consider how much of a challenge it had been for her to own up to her mistake, to face the discomfort of realizing her own biases. "I'm glad, too," he replied. "It's been a journey." They shared a quiet moment, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. Marcus had come to realize that growth wasn't a one-time thing. It was an ongoing process for everyone. And though it wasn't perfect, the neighborhood was changing. People were changing. As the night grew colder, the group started to disperse, heading back to their homes with a renewed sense of connection. Helena waved Marcus off as he walked back to his house. "Good night, Marcus. See you soon." "Good night, Helena," he called, smiling. He walked into his house, closing the door behind him. But as he leaned against it, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come since the first day he'd stepped into the neighborhood. It had been tough, no doubt. The initial tension, the feeling of being out of place, the fear of being judged based on his skin color instead of his character. All felt so heavy back then. But now it was different. Marcus had found not just a home, but a community. People who had their own flaws and struggles, but who were willing to learn, to grow, and to make things right. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As he sat down on his couch, looking out the window at the quiet street, he realized that this place was finally starting to feel like home. Not because of the house, but because of the people in it. And in that moment, Marcus knew that the journey he had started when he first moved here was far from over. But for the first time, he was okay with that.